Hello and welcome to GoT Thrones, a Game of Thrones podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Kolasinski. Alexandra is not with me this evening, but with me is Brian Kronner, the editor of GeekExchange.com and Grizzly Bomb. Hi, Brian.
Hi, how's it going?
Not too bad. Alexandra writes on occasion for Geek Exchange, which is how we got to know Brian. I met him at Comic-Con this year as well, which was a blast.
It was exhausting.
Yeah. You were there a lot more than me. You were definitely working it. You want to tell us a little bit about Geek Exchange and about Grizzly Bomb, and then we'll start talking about Episode 4, The Spoils of War?
Sure. I started years ago. I wrote with my buddy Scott at a site called Bam Kapow, and when that ended, I needed an outlet to force my opinion on people. So I started grizzlybomb.com, and we wrote there for years. And then by dumb luck, we got found out by Geek Magazine. They stumbled across the site and liked what we did, so we started writing for them and eventually took over their the web branch of the magazine. And so I run the geekexchange.com, which is the website for Geek Magazine, which Alexandra contributes to. And that's why I was at Comic-Con. I live in the Detroit area, so it was a long week in San Diego, but it was a lot of fun, and I got to meet Johnny, and I'm excited to help out and contribute tonight on the podcast.
Yeah, we're glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. Alex would be glad you were here if she was here. And Geek Magazine just relaunched the print version, correct?
Yes. So Geek's gone through it's been a roller coaster. The original Geek ran from 2006 to 2010, and then the publisher, because everybody knows print media is in a tough spot right now, publisher went bankrupt. My editors bought the rights back. They relaunched the magazine with a new publisher in 2012. We went a couple years, and then that publisher did some restructuring and canceled about 40 titles. We were one of them. We have once again reacquired the rights, and the first issue just launched a couple weeks back.
At Comic-Con.
We are at Comic-Con, and it is available now at every Walmart in the States, and it's free if you go to the electronics counter. Walmart is sponsoring the magazine for us, so they seem to be fans, so we shouldn't get canceled again, is my hope. So, so the site's up, geekexchange.com. The magazine's free at Walmart. Check it out.
All right. Now, for those who listened earlier this week, Alex and I did discuss the big old battle, but we will be giving Brian a chance to weigh in on that at the end of the episode. But first, want to talk about all the other important things that happened in The Spoils of War. This was directed. It was written by D&D, the two producers and showrunners of Game of Thrones, and directed by Matt Shakman. Smallest scene, but the one that I've gotten a lot of chatter about from friends of the show is the one in King's Landing with Cersei and Mark Gatiss, Tycho Nestro from the Iron Bank. So in that scene, if you recall, essentially Cersei says, "You're going to have your gold, and we're going to pay it back in one lump sum." And Tycho's...
one lump sum acquired from Highgarden.
Exactly. And Tycho Nestoris is kind of on the fence as to whether that's really going to happen, but does pledge to back Cersei when it does. Now, there's a saying that goes around that if you owe the bank $1 million, you're in trouble. If the bank owes you, if you owe the bank $100 million, suddenly the bank's in trouble, and you essentially own the bank because you have that control and leverage. And Cersei is almost losing her leverage by paying everything back in one lump sum. What do you think about that?
Well, first, real quick, I want to say he will always be Mycroft Holmes to me. Gaddis is a writer and co-star on BBC's Sherlock, and he's excellent on there.
Mm-hmm.
But I in theory, that is, if you owe the bank that much money, then there's nothing, they can't cover all that typically, any bank. But the Cersei paying off the bank in full is simply setting up her ability to borrow more because she knows war is coming. This is just a down payment on the war she's about to have with Daenerys. And and you can see how excited Gaddis is because that's his business, his loans, like it's all and he even makes mention of like how people are going to be disappointed because they won't be getting her interest payments anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of a funny scene only in that it's just a continuation of everything that's already been happening. And it's I think the purpose of it is simply to show like her reputation changing and her turning into Tywin almost.
Yeah.
Like
that's a good point. That was a very Tywin-esque move of we're going to pay everything right now because a Lannister always pays her debts.
Yep.
Tycho does mention the Golden Company, which is a band of sellswords in Bravos that was a rival to Dario.
The Second Sons.
Yeah, to Dario's Second Sons. So, and since Cersei also controls essentially the only navy in the Narrow Sea, getting them over is feasible.
Right, so I think too that the purpose of the scene more than anything else. I mean, logistically, the funding for the war and everything, because they've made a point in saying that the Lannisters are broke, and that they owe the Iron Bank all this money. But I think more so than anything, you've had through the history of the show, you have both Tywin and Olenna basically tell Cersei, "You're not as smart as you think you are. You're not as good as you think you are." And this is her kind of finally taking up that mantle and letting the audience know she is the new Tywin. And despite what Olenna Tyrell said and despite what her father said, she showed in the finale last year, she did outsmart everybody. She's going to be as ruthless as need be. And while the first 6 seasons were all about her children, it's shifted. I think after the shame walk, she shifted focus to revenge is more important than anything. And so I think her getting the validation that she always seeked and never got from her father, and now getting it from the Iron Bank is a power play. Because I think most people assume by the end of the season, Daenerys will defeat Cersei, and then next year we can focus on the White Walkers or whatever. So Cersei needs these early season victories. You got Highgarden and you got the Iron Bank and everything. To make Cersei reputable and a legitimate threat to Dany and to Jon Snow, you have to pump her up early in the season.
Right. Yeah, that's and she's already been, whether or not you consider the blowing up of the Sept a victory, a true victory, or just a delaying of the inevitable. She and Jaime, even with the loss they took this week, have set themselves up to be a lot more formidable than we expected moving into season 7.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like they've made a point several times throughout the season to mention how, like, oh, well, of course Daenerys could just go to King's Landing and take over. And the only reason she hasn't is because she doesn't want to kill innocents. So the show has to do something to make Cersei seem like a credible threat to Daenerys. And I think they've done that.
Yes, I agree.
Taking out Dorne and Highgarden and the Greyjoy kids all, in a span of just a couple episodes, leveled the playing field a little bit. And I think, well, we'll get more into the dragons later, but
one of my favorite moments after the episode, if you watch it on HBO, which everyone should be doing and not getting it from any other source, because we pay for our content.
That's right.
Is in the behind the episode, I laughed. I forget if it was Benioff Weiss or if it was Benioff or if it was Weiss that said that referred to Cersei taking out her two big enemies in the Greyjoys and in Olenna without mentioning Dorne at all.
Yeah. And I think
it just made me laugh.
I think now you've got Ilaria Sand, who, again, another brilliant British actress, who I fell in love with on British TV before, much like Mark Gatiss, when she played John Luther's wife in the first season of Luther. I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
I didn't see Luther, no.
That's phenomenal. But she, Ilaria is now. It was a great send-off. Mm-hmm. She's imprisoned. She's hopeless. They showed. I mean, that was that scene a few weeks ago with her and Cersei in the dungeon. That
was incredible,
phenomenal. And but now they're completely. And as you and Alex have talked about several times on the podcast, the whole Dorne storyline, they clearly said we just don't have time for this. So they just we're just going to write off all the Martells and all the Sand Snakes, and we're just going to get it out of the way. Mm-hmm. And it does. Season 6 and 7 have felt a lot like, all right, we need to tie up all these loose ends to narrow the character base down. Like as soon as they passed up the books, they said, all right, we're going to eliminate half of these story threads.
Yeah.
Which is fine. But at least Ilaria got a good send-off. Yeah, and I know Alex had said a couple weeks ago she still wasn't convinced that Ilaria wouldn't, find a way to get revenge on the Mountain or whatever. But we haven't even seen the Mountain this season, outside of just a couple glimpses. Mm-hmm. So I think the Dorne characters are pretty much done. I wouldn't be surprised if we never see the Ilaria again.
I'm kind of leaning with you on that. That I would be surprised if they come back. And if they do, it's not going to be... It's going to be heartbreaking, and it's not going to be vengeance.
No, I think it's going to be more Cersei gloating.
Yeah.
And I will admit, I love Lena Headey, who plays Cersei. She was on Terminator Sarah Connor Chronicles. She was in Dredd. She was, her whole...
incredible in Dredd.
Yep. Not The Conjuring, The Purge. I mean, her whole resume is it's all projects that I love. Mm-hmm. And I met her actually here in Detroit at the Motor City Comic Con a couple years ago, and she was awesome. So part of me is as easy as it is to hate Cersei, part of me is always rooting for Cersei simply because she's played by Lena Headey. But I think anything from here out where we see Ilaria will simply be Cersei gloating.
Yeah.
And it'll be, it'll just be used to pump up the throne.
Mm-hmm. And anything else you want to talk about that happened in King's Landing or that you think might be happening in King's Landing over the next week or so?
Well, I will say, actually, no, not really. Nothing that doesn't concern anything going forward.
It's going to be the reaction to Jaime.
Right. Jaime and Cersei are the only characters of note really left. I mean, you've got Qyburn and you've got the Mountain, but I mean, outside of that, there's nobody left in King's Landing to care about.
Yeah.
It's basically just the Cersei show.
Right.
So, I would say it's all just going to depend on what they do with Jaime going forward.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get to that at the end of the episode. But first, let's pop up north to Winterfell. First thing we see is Littlefinger having a creepy stepdad moment with Bran. Blah.
Bran.
Yeah.
It's funny that you say that. Quick aside, I just earlier tonight watched. I don't know if you ever watched Seth Meyers' show, but he occasionally does a skit called Game of Jones, where he watches the new episode of Game of Thrones with Leslie Jones.
Yep.
And she consistently calls Bran Bronn. And tonight, this is going to sound super unprofessional. I can never remember the actor who plays Varys.
Comley.
It's a strange name.
Yeah.
But he was on there with as a surprise for Leslie Jones. Mm-hmm. He came out. It's Conleth.
Conleth Heath.
Yeah, Conleth Hill.
Hill.
Conleth Hill. So Conleth Hill comes out dressed as Varys, and he's sitting on the couch with Leslie Jones and Seth Meyer, and she kept calling him Bronn, and he kept and she kept calling Theron, and he had to keep correcting her on names, and she was getting all mad at him. It was pretty funny. Anyhow.
Bran receives a gift from Littlefinger in the dagger that was used in an attempted murder all the way back in season 1.
And that's got to be, for any Game of Thrones fan, I mean, how can you not love the constant, long game that they play?
Right.
Like here, we haven't seen this dagger in 6 years, and now it's like a major set piece again.
It's a major set piece, and he lies about it immediately, saying he has no idea. It is his dagger. But the only people who know that were, I think the only person that knew that was Catelyn.
Now, and correct me.
Possibly Ned.
I'm not as versed on the books as you guys are. I read slow, so I did all the audio books years ago, between seasons 2 and 3. But if I remember correctly, in the books, wasn't the dagger Joffrey? Wasn't it Joffrey who hired the?
It was Joffrey who hired the assassin. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. And they don't,
or at least it is strongly assumed to have been Joffrey who hired the assassin.
All right, and that's what I got from the books, but I don't remember them going into detail in the show. And
I don't know that they actively. I don't recall that they actively specified that, and I don't believe that it was actively confirmed. It was just the best theory is that Joffrey hired him because Robert said offhand that the kid would be better off dead.
Yeah.
And that it was almost it was Joffrey's. It was the Joffrey equivalent of compassion.
Well, and not to jump back about 100 episodes worth of show or anything, but
you listen to the podcast, you know that that's par for the course.
Yeah, but isn't it funny? Like recently, last time I rewatched the first season, it's crazy to me. Like when the show starts, you kind of think that the focus is going to be, well, who murdered? You think Cersei and Jaime did all, because you see Jaime push Bran out the window.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these things that happen that are implied that you believe that the Jaime and Cersei are responsible for, like the murder of Jon Arryn.
Right.
And eventually it comes out it was not them. It was Littlefinger.
It was Littlefinger and Lysa.
Right. And when you go back and you see that, knowing what happens, the real catalyst of everything is not Jon Arryn's murder, as the show initially has you believe, like this is what gets the ball rolling. It's really Catelyn, Littlefinger, convincing Catelyn that Tyrion is responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And it's that episode, I probably episode 5 or 6 or whatever it is, mm-hmm. where she enters the tavern and she takes Tyrion prisoner. It's like, this is the domino effect that leads to so much death and destruction, and half of the Starks dying is simply Tyrion being arrested by Catelyn. And it's and it all leads back to that dagger. And the dagger is such an important prop in the history of the show because it really starts everything, like Littlefinger alludes to in this episode.
Right. And Bran makes an excellent, callback to that, in that he knows how responsible Littlefinger is for everything, even if he isn't quite. I don't think that Bran, either he is incapable because he can't ruin the, because integrity of the timeline or whatever, or just because he doesn't get it because he's robot Bran now. But
right.
When he says chaos is a ladder, he's not just saying, I know that this was your dagger. He's saying, I know that you have been responsible for everything so far. Or I know everything you're responsible for. I just can't make that statement because I'm like the navigators in Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. And since season 1, episode 1, I have been a Stark sycophant. Mm-hmm. I am, without a doubt, Team Stark all the way since day one. I know a lot of people liked, the Lannisters or whoever else, and because the Starks are not exactly hip or with it or anything, but for me, it's Arya is my favorite character, and I mean since day one, I've always been with the Starks, and when I saw this week after Bran said, chaos is a ladder, and Littlefinger gets freaked out a little bit, and I saw lots of articles online this week talking about if you don't remember, he's quoting Littlefinger, and I'm thinking, if you're a fan of the show, how can you possibly not remember that? I think it's like late in season 3, the scene between him and Varys when Joffrey kills Ross with the crossbow, when he gives the chaos is a ladder speech, is to me one of the most memorable scenes in the entire series.
Oh, absolutely.
And the fact that so many people didn't pick up on that or didn't remember it kind of blew my mind. Like, how do you watch this show for 6 or 7 years and not remember that part? I mean, that was a huge, it was just hugely.
It's if you had to boil the show down to one sentence, that would be a contender, even if it's not.
Yep.
At least for the political aspects of the show.
Well, I think up until that point, within the show, Varys and Littlefinger were kind of looked at as equals. Like they're very similar. They're playing the political game in King's Landing, and you don't know who to believe or who to trust. And I think that is the point where that's the fork in the road. Is that exact scene is where you realize, okay, Littlefinger is he's out for the throne, and Varys is simply trying to keep his head above water and do what's best for the realm.
Yeah.
And it was a major turning point. So the fact that so many people didn't seem to remember that speech kind of took me aback. Now, I understand that not everybody watches every episode 3 or 4 or 5 times, but that was something series wide that's always stuck out to me.
Well, I think that, and as a editor for a genre website, you probably know this as well. Just because there are a lot of articles being written about, we'll explain that one scene, doesn't necessarily mean there are a lot of people that the majority of people need it explained to. I mean, there are people who are watching Game of Thrones for the first time this season.
Right.
Last week was the most watched episode of all time.
Which is funny because, like you said earlier, everybody should be paying for content and watch it legitimately. If you appreciate media, do it the right way. Spend a couple bucks, especially now that HBO offers a streaming service separate from the cable subscription.
HBO, if you're looking to sponsor us, gotthronespodcast@gmail.com.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because, like you said, it's was it the single most watched or one of the most watched?
It was the most watched episode.
So it's the most watched
including
episode.
Legitimately.
Right, so it's the most watched episode ever on HBO, but it was also leaked days early, and it's one of the most pirated episodes of any television show in history. So, in addition to, and that's been the case for years. When you look at, they'll release lists of most pirated show of the year, and like 9 of the 10 will be episodes of Game of Thrones.
And that makes a little less sense to me now because it is more accessible. But it also, I mean, and they didn't really go after it early on, which I think was honestly partly responsible for the success.
Execs from HBO have actually come out in the past and said, look, we know that pirating is just a nature of the beast. We expect it to happen. But the fact that so much gets pirated and the ratings still keep climbing just talks to how powerful this TV show is. It's not TV, it's HBO.
Yeah. So we had following Littlefinger Bran, Mira came in to bow out.
And how heartbreaking is that scene?
It was. I'm a little annoyed with how they're treating Bran.
Oh,
I don't
absolutely.
love. I think that the psychic robot, emotionless Vulcan thing is a little overplayed. If you there's a screen capper on Imgur, whatever, whichever you prefer, called Too Long Didn't. It's TLDW. Too Long
Yeah.
Didn't Watch.
Yeah.
That's just 180 images, and the image for that scene was I downloaded all of history, but I ran out of room, so I had to delete my personality,
Yeah.
and
It's
that whole thing.
for a show with as much. I mean, there's so many characters and there's so much going on, and there's so much history, and your characters are spread out, and it's in a setting where they can't speak to each other. There's no internet. There's no cell phone. Bran is your connecting,
Mm-hmm.
like, membrane, kind of. He didn't interact with Jon Snow at Caster's Keep a couple seasons ago when
Mm-hmm.
that's what everybody wanted. He hasn't interacted with his family in years,
Yep.
and so now he's finally back, and there's
And he's making creepy rape illusions.
right, and it's like you look at that first scene when he was back in Winterfell with Sansa a couple weeks ago, and he says, like, there's all these. He could tell her Littlefinger killed father. He can tell her that the White
John's not your
Walkers are
brother, or the
coming.
White Walkers.
John, yeah,
Yeah, John's your
John's a
uncle.
Targaryen. Supposedly a Targaryen. There's all these things he can tell her, and the thing he chooses to say to her makes no logical sense
Yeah.
outside of the fact that, like, well, if we reveal this information too soon, it ruins
There goes
future
the show.
plans. Right, but from an effective storytelling standpoint, from a writing standpoint, that scene doesn't make a lot of sense unless you're purposely doing it to set something up later.
Yeah.
And the portrayal of Bran lately, I liked the "chaos is a ladder" quote that he used to Littlefinger, because it's like an F you to Littlefinger without actually having to say it. But it's the only cool thing Bran's done since he got back, and
I would say there's one more cool thing that Brand has done since he got back.
Hit me.
And that is giving Arya the dagger.
Giving Arya the dagger. That's what I assumed you were going to say.
Because I actively think, that he gave her that dagger because of things that he saw in the future. Either because it's going to be used against Littlefinger himself, or that she's going to be defending Winterfell, or on her that she is going to come across White Walkers sometime in the next very soon.
And that's a good point. The Valyrian steel with the White Walkers and all that. I think what this episode did more than anything, the scene where Bran hands Arya the dagger, in addition to the scene later with Arya where Littlefinger is watching her spar. Littlefinger, when Bran says cast a ladder, and later when he watches Arya spar, these are eye-opening moments for him. He's been focusing all his attention on Sansa and trying to, move chess pieces where he needs them, and now he realizes Arya and Bran are two chess pieces he can't move. If nothing else, I feel like this episode almost takes Littlefinger not out of the game, but it puts him at the biggest disadvantage he's been in the series.
Yeah.
For the first time, he's not 12 steps ahead.
Right.
Arya doesn't trust him.
Because
Sansa,
there's two people that came back from the dead that he couldn't predict.
Right. And it's, to be fair, I mean, I really like Littlefinger as a character. To be fair, he's done everything he can be expected to do. But, like, when he's telling Sansa how you got to be 10 steps ahead, and Bran is effectively a million steps ahead.
Yeah, Bran's read the books.
Yep. So it's, Littlefinger, there's not a whole lot that he can contribute at this point because new pieces have been introduced to the game. Things that couldn't have been foreseen.
Yeah.
And I also, real quick, I wonder if anybody on this show is to know about the Three-Eyed Raven or some of these prophecies, you would think Littlefinger doesn't necessarily believe them, but he's a guy that just sort of soaks up information. So I'm not saying he knows about the three-eyed raven, but he definitely knows something is up with Bran.
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's interesting because you do have people like take Rhaegar for example,
yeah,
who actively believed the prophecies and started the war, not the War of the Five Kings, started Robert's Rebellion by kidnapping and or marrying Lyanna Stark because he felt like he needed to have a child, and his wife, Ella, Elia, not
Elia Martell.
Martell, yeah, Elia Martell was not doing that. Well, was not giving him the heirs that he needed to fulfill the prophecy. And
how does that
someone
story change too? You think about when we're introduced to that story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story of lust. It's a story of here's a rich guy who just takes what he wants. He's a showboat and everything.
He's a showboat. He's entitled, and he kidnapped this woman and was just another mad Targaryen, and then we find out, oh no, he's a warrior poet who is acting to fulfill a prophecy, and in his, maybe that's still mad, but save the world.
Well, that was something else I was always interested in. And I don't think it's, again, something I don't remember them getting into in the show. I could be mistaken, but in the books, they at least imply that, like, Rhaegar knew his father was crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and he and Jaime had their own plan to sort of take the throne. And Rhaegar and Jaime Lannister are best friends, and that's something I don't think really gets highlighted in the show so much. The Targaryens are just always shown as at odds with the Baratheons and the Lannisters and everything. I think people forget, Tywin was the Mad King's hand.
Tywin was the Mad King's hand, and was also active, but actively cooed against him because of the madness, not because he wanted power.
But I think Jaime and Rhaegar's relationship has been mostly ignored on the show.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's because Rhaegar can't be seen.
Yep. There's just too much going. I understand. There's way too much from the books. You can't put everything into the show, and that's why we've seen characters combined.
Yep.
Gendry is actually a combination of three different
14
characters.
different bastards. Yeah.
Yeah. And same with Bronn is a combination of a bunch of different characters.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Going back to the Bran scene, because we brought up Rhaegar, it will be interesting. I don't know if we're going to see Mira again or not. I haven't looked at the cast list for the rest of the season. But if she is going home, she's going to the one other person who knows about Jon's parentage, which is her father.
I will go so far as to say, and I love Benioff and Weiss. I do think that since they've passed up the books, the dialogue has taken a big hit in most episodes. There's still been some good monologues and soliloquies, but for the most part, the dialogue's gone down. But I will say, if we do not see Mira and we never meet her father, there's some bad writing going on. Because we've been hearing
about Howland Reed for
7 seasons,
mm-hmm.
6.5 seasons, and we haven't seen him. He's supposed, outside of the flashback, when Bran's at the Tower of Joy. We haven't seen him present day. He is supposedly the only other person alive, or the only person alive, who is there for Jon Snow's birth. If we never see him and we don't see Mira again, Mira's story arc is very, very depressing. Yeah. She loses her brother. She watches Hodor die. She watches Summer die. She suffers through the north, suffers through the snow, saves Bran's life, and then is just like, okay, later, see ya, go home. And it's poor storytelling. If we're getting multiple scenes of Samwell Tarly emptying bedpans and we don't see Mira again, then there's some questionable writing going on.
I'm not convinced that in the books Howland Reed is not a red herring. So I agree with you to a point.
Yeah.
But I'm not. I just feel like Howland Reed is one of those talked up so much characters that we may never see him.
I don't know if you remember when Ian McShane was first cast last season.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
they didn't announce who it was. All the rumors were he's either going to be Sam's father, Randall Tarley,
yep,
or he's going to be Howland Reed. And everybody said it's going to be one of these two, and it ended up being neither character. But Howland Reed has been extremely talked up, and I would just at this point I'd be disappointed if we never see him, and we never see. I can't remember the name of their castle, their home, but in the swamps there.
Yeah, it's not Deepwood Mott. It's
something Mott.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember it off the top of my. It's in the neck, but.
But as a viewer, Bran has become infuriating because we know he has all the information needed that our other Stark children need, and he's not delivering it.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree. So we talked a little bit about the knife scene. Arya and Sansa had a touching moment where Arya is completely honest with Sansa. Oh, I've got a list of people I'm going to kill, and Sansa laughs it off as a joke. And I really liked their reunion.
It's great, and I think that pays off later. In the sparring scene once we get to that. But I will say this. Bran's return home with Sansa and Arya's return home with Sansa. And that was, I know logically it had to be Bran last week who returned home just because of where people were at. But last week I remember getting very excited, hoping it was going to be Arya come in. And then when it was Bran, I was extremely disappointed. And then this week,
notes on the episode when I was watching it with Katie, I take my notes on my first watch and then my second watch. My notes were just what Katie said, which was, "Oh, it's Bran."
Yeah, exactly. Who wanted to see Bran when you could see Arya instead?
Yeah,
but so this week it was a nice throwback to season 1 when Arya was trying to get back in the Red Keep and the guards didn't believe her. But it was not. Neither Bran nor Arya returning to Sansa had anywhere near the emotional impact of Sansa returning to Jon.
No, that's and I think that is large.
Go ahead.
I think that it's largely because while both Bran and Arya had a rough time of things, Sansa was the one who needed someone. Where Bran and Arya both learned.
Well, Bran had a whole group of defenders.
Mm-hmm.
He had Summer, he had Hodor, he had the Reeds, he had the Three-Eyed Raven. Arya largely was on her own, even when she was at the House of the Many Faces or the
House of Black and White.
Black and White. The House of Black and White. She didn't really have allies there. The faceless man, whose name now totally escapes me.
No one. It's Jaqen H'ghar.
Jaqen H'ghar, yeah. Even though he clearly favored Arya over the waif, he still wasn't a straight up friend.
No, he was wise sensei.
Right, and I think he always assumed that Arya would always defeat the waif, and that would be her next step forward or whatever. But it was not. She didn't have. Arya was much more alone than anyone else, and I think that's largely why she's become so hard. And I think once they get to the sparring scene, you kind of see the reactions from Sansa and Littlefinger, and it's sort of Sansa realizing when Arya said, "I have a list of people I want to kill." She doesn't believe it until that minute.
Right. I did like in their first scene when Sansa says to Arya, "When Jon sees you, his heart's probably going to stop."
Yep, because they built that relationship back in season 1 in episode 1 or 2, whenever it was, when Jon gives Arya
her needle.
and you can tell that they are different from the other Stark children. Arya, even though she's not a bastard like Jon is more closely related to Jon than any of the other kids.
Yeah.
And I think too, part of it is simply that Ian Hempstead Wright, who plays Bran, part of it is just pure nature. When we liked Bran, when Bran was doing things we liked, when he was after he was first crippled and he was running Winterfell in the absence of all the other Starks, he was a very sweet and likable character and he was a little kid. And I think puberty hit hard. And when he became like 6'5", it became easier to like care less about him. He wasn't, he's supposed to be younger than Arya, and you look at him and she's half his size, and
he's probably shaving twice a day now.
Right, and for 5 seasons now, we've just watched him get dragged around on a sled or carried by Hodor, whereas we've seen Arya go through this emotional growth as a character. Bran has become this supernatural being, but we didn't necessarily see him grow as a character. He went from being Brandon Stark to being not Brandon Stark, whereas Arya progressively became no one and became a killer and became assassin. And we saw the emotion and we saw the training and the suffering she went through. Whereas with Bran, a lot of times his suffering was put on the shoulders of Mira or on Hodor. And it wasn't, he didn't have to face the full brunt of it alone. So when Bran shows up, he's not, Bran is, I think, more anticipated. Anybody who likes the Bran storyline likes it more for, well, what does it mean supernaturally? What does it mean? What effects will have it on the wall?
Yeah, it's not what's going to happen to Bran. It's what is Bran doing for the story.
Whereas we as an audience are emotionally invested in what Arya is doing.
Right.
When she turns away from the House of Black and White and goes back from no one back to Arya Stark, and when she picks up Needle, there's like, it's hard not to fist pump in the air, like, fuck yeah, that's Arya Stark. That's what I want. And so that, with last week when Bran showed up instead of Arya, it was a huge letdown for both your wife and I. And so then when Arya shows up this week, it's not the giant run up and hug like Jon and Sansa had, but it's because Arya and Sansa are not the people they were in season 1, which is the last time they were together.
That's a really good point.
Arya simply saying, "Do I have to call you Lady Stark now?" There's they were never overly close as kids, and now here they are. They're older. They've gone through the stuff. They love each other because they're sisters, but there's not that, close intimacy that two siblings who grew up together and face these things together would have.
Yeah, I don't think there's conflict there, but it's not a touchy-feely.
People thought Arya was dead for years, and now she returns, and no one knows where she's been or what she was doing. And she's like, she returns as a stranger to Winterfell. And I thought that was powerful when she goes to the store or goes to the door or the gate, and she asked, "Where's Maester Lewin or Sir Roderick?"
Right.
There is now, through Theon and the Greyjoys, and then through the Boltons, and all throughout these years,
there's no one.
Right. How many people are left at Winterfell who knew Arya Stark? And to return home after all these years, and there's literally no one there that can vouch and say, yeah, that's Arya Stark, is, it's sad in and of itself.
Yeah, and they touch on it when they talk about how there was no one who knew Ned's face to carve his statue.
Yep.
There's not much to say about the fight between the sparring between Brienne and Arya that you didn't say already.
Yeah, not much outside of it was by far my favorite scene of the episode. It was
great.
It was Arya showed, at the beginning she's being playful, but then when she gets kicked and knocked down, she turns into something else. She turns into that assassin. When she flips up and the stance she does, and this is something else. Game of Thrones has been largely criticized for years about their one-on-one battles and their fight choreography and everything. This is one that uniformly, when you look online, fight choreographers or sword experts are saying this was accurate. This is how that fight would go.
It was exciting. I have a little bit of stage combat experience, not much.
Yeah.
But I know people who have a lot more than I do, and also I mentioned briefly reading last or a couple days ago. Saw a few threads on Reddit about it, and the nature of how Arya fought was dead on of what specifically a Spanish style of rapier fighting would do against a broadsword.
Yeah. And something I think too, and I just want to throw out, Maisie Williams deserves a ton of credit because I read an article just yesterday about how in season 1, when she got cast, her mother went through and was reading the books to find out about the character. And she said, "Oh, do you know that Arya is supposed to be left-handed?" Well, Maisie Williams at that point insisted that she be trained. She's right-handed, but she insisted in being trained everything left-handed. For years,
that's incredible.
She's trained all her sword fighting choreography, everything has been trained as a southpaw. And this is the first time that we really see it work. And they say like that's part of like she even went and took fencing classes and everything.
Yeah.
And this is something that 99% of people are watching aren't going to notice, but it's how ingrained in the character she is. And they say, like in fencing, if you can learn left-handed, that throws off fighters. And you can see it it helps her right here. And that the first strike when she does Brienne puts her sword out and she dodges it and then hits Brienne's sword 3 times.
Yeah.
Just like boom, boom, boom is like, that's my favorite 2 seconds of the whole episode.
It was great. I know there's some people who listen who are fencers, and so if you want to weigh in on Facebook, please do. I don't know how much of the fight was her, but in watching it, when I did my rewatches, a lot more of the fight was her than I thought would be.
Yeah,
she was. I'm sure there were stunt doubles in there for a couple of those shots like that, like the breakdancing move to get off the ground. But
I think
it was actively them for a good chunk of that fight.
Oh, I would say vast majority. And I think what happened is you've got a lot of like very well established theatrical actors or well respected actors in the show who are not bad by any means, but they come in and they say, all right, this is my job. This is what I'm going to do. And I think more than anyone else on the show, and I mean, I can't know without being on set, but the impression I get more than anyone else on the show is that Maisie Williams absolutely like loves this show. And she has ingrained her whole life in like, how can I make Arya more believable and better? And I think it's really starting to come through and show more in stuff like this. Cause like I said, most people are never going to notice that she learned how to do everything left-handed
and nobody would have complained. Well, it's the internet. Very few people would have complained if she didn't. Someone would have
complained.
Yeah.
But yes, it would have been a very small minority.
Yeah. So, and we talked about the Littlefinger and Sansa moments watching it, but that was fantastic. Just watching them, both of them realize that this is not that this is not a child, right?
And I think that scene is telling in a lot of ways because, like, after it happens, and Brienne says, who taught you how to fight like that? And she says, no one. You would think, again, Littlefinger is a master of information. That's his job. He's got to know about the Faceless Men. He's got to see the dagger he gave Bran. He has to see how she fought. He knows Brienne, how great a fighter Brienne is. To see Arya hold her own and to carry that dagger and to then, like, they stared each other down at the end. That's Littlefinger's got to realize he's one of the smartest characters in the show. he knows that he's not going to be able to trick Bran. He's not going to be able to trick Arya,
Mm-hmm.
and what he's trying to do with Sansa isn't necessarily working.
Yeah.
So
if I were Littlefinger, I would be making some business trips in the not too distant future, because I think Littlefinger's on the short list. I think that Arya is going to be that Arya is going to act on Littlefinger before the season is out.
Especially if she finds out, if Bran tells her anything about his involvement in Ned's death or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I could be mistaken. Wasn't Sansa in the courtroom or in the throne room when Littlefinger put the knife to Ned's throat in season 1?
I don't think so.
Maybe not. It's been a while.
Yeah.
But, his involvement in the death of Ned Stark, while Sansa, who has learned politicking, might look at that as like a strategic play, Arya is going to look at it one way and one way only. Well, your name is on the list now.
Mm-hmm.
And when Sansa's watching it happen, and she knows Brienne's a great warrior, to see her little sister, and you've seen lots of stuff about this online lately too. Jon Snow came back from the dead. Bran is a super psychic, can see everything, and Arya's super killer assassin. And then Sansa's just like, yeah, I learned politics.
Yeah.
It's like, where's my superpower?
I think we're going to see it very soon, in that we are going to, when it becomes time to unite Targaryen and Stark, and the various Bannermen. I think we're going to see it when it's Tyrion versus Sansa. In the war of in the war of words, in the Game of Thrones, I suppose.
Well, and you've seen Sansa. That's one thing. She's become much more sharp-tongued over the last few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And like when she told Littlefinger last week or the week before, whenever it was, she's like, don't bother to finish. I am sure it would have been clever.
Yeah.
She's really, and even John made mention of it. He's like, well, she's not hiding it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
She is becoming, I foresee her being the eventual Warden of the North more so than John. Like she's definitely going to run Winterfell. John doesn't want anything to do with that. I think.
John's going to be the War King.
Yeah, and I think if they can defeat the White Walkers, then John's going to be like, all right, I'm done. I don't want to be in charge anymore. I don't want anything to do with this.
Mm-hmm. If he lives.
And Sansa's role is just gonna. She's kind of at this point. She has been groomed for seasons now, watching Cersei, watching Littlefinger, watching the Boltons. She's been kind of groomed to lead. Mm-hmm. And being Ned Stark's daughter, I think, is gonna mean a lot very soon.
Yeah. So, anything else on Winterfell? I think that we've.
Simply that I have a 100% non-sexual crush on Arya Stark.
Okay.
Arya Stark is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, and at this point in the show, I care less about who ends up on the throne and more about who Arya gets to cross off her list.
We've talked about this on the show before, but I don't know if you've heard about the treatment that George R. R. Martin wrote for the 3 books that were going to be the Game of Thrones series. But in the end of it, in the end of the original plotline, Arya and Tyrion end up together.
I had not, I had heard rumors about that years ago. I didn't realize that was from Martin.
Yeah, it's from the letter he wrote to a publisher, or to his publisher specifically. And he has veered very far away from that.
I was going to say, I cannot see a believable outcome where that happens anymore.
Yeah. It's unlikely.
But that said, at the end of season 1, you couldn't have seen rooting for Sansa as hard as you are.
Or rooting for Jaime.
Yep. Jaime and Sansa have totally turned. And even Cersei, who didn't, during the shame walk and all that stuff, who didn't feel for Cersei a little bit? And
yeah. Even knowing
you look back to at season 1, like the way that they make you feel about Jaime and Cersei right off, but it's like in reality, Jaime's actions pushing Bran out the window are totally justifiable, because if Robert finds out, then he's not only going to execute Cersei and Jaime, but he's going to execute all three of those kids. So at that point, Jaime has to make a calculated decision, and he does it very smugly. Mm-hmm. So early on the show, you don't realize what he's doing, but when he pushes Bran out the window, he's doing so to save the lives of everyone he loves.
Yeah.
And then you find out they didn't kill Jon Arryn, and they're not responsible for the attempted assassination of Brandon Stark. Mm-hmm. And then Cersei visiting Catelyn in Bran's room seems more genuine, because when it happens, you think it's gesture. But yeah, as far as final thoughts on Winterfell, I would just say, I'm happy that there are 3 Starks back in Winterfell. I'm excited for Jon and Arya to see each other. But I think at this point, it's only a matter of time before Arya leaves and goes, because her list is now her priority, and she's got a new Valyrian steel dagger.
She's got a new toy. She's checked in with the fam.
And as valuable as she might be to Jon, as an assassin, I just don't see. Game of Thrones doesn't typically work that way.
Right. I think Jon Snow wouldn't work that way.
Right. Jon Snow is going to not want to accept what Arya has become. He's going to want to protect Arya, and she's going to have to strike out on her own to meet her own goals. Mm-hmm. I don't think she can ever go back to truly being Arya Stark and just living in Winterfell and being a member of the family. She's progressed past that now.
Yeah. So the other major, and these are probably going to be the three places we hit for the rest of the season. Well, I guess the next episode is called Eastwatch, so we're going to see Eastwatch by the sea. Say what?
Does that mean Tormund?
That means Tormund. Die? I hope not.
I hope not either, because what a fun character. Mm-hmm. He is I don't know if it's just the beard or what, but that is a guy that just immediately became endeared to the fan base.
Oh yeah.
And as soon as, when they had the meeting and said, like, this is where it's going to get attacked first, and Tormund says, all right, we'll go there. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like he's doomed already, and I hope it's not true.
Yeah. There's an interesting point that people have pointed out about Eastwatch, and that's that this season in the credits there is ice going around on the sea.
I saw
past
that.
The wall, which is probably telling for next for this coming week.
We did an article about that on Geek.
Maybe that's where I saw it.
Could be. And I didn't notice it on my first watch, but the second time I watched it, I said, wait a minute, that water's not always frozen like that. And it could just be an effect, in like, oh, winter's coming. But it could be a strategical thing too. I mean, they're very careful with how they do the opening credits, and like what banners hanging what castle, and whether or not something's burning, and who they're showing, and like for them to make a deliberate change and show that the water around Eastwatch is frozen, and not protected by wall.
Yeah,
that could totally nullify all the theories about like, oh well, if Bran was touched by the Night King, goes under the wall, does it break the spells, and blah blah blah.
Yep.
So I mean that'd be an easy way to get around blaming Brandon Stark for
ruining everything.
Yep.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and we'll be seeing it soon. Dragonstone, we had a couple very light moments. We had of girl talk between Missandei and Daenerys, and guy talk between Jon and Davos.
And that stuff was all fun, but did it seem out of place at all? I liked it. I enjoyed it as a viewer, but more so the Dany and Missandei than Jon and Davos. But it felt like I don't
Davos
know.
has gotten a little bit
Cheeky.
uh, dad.
Yeah.
He's gotten a little bit good nature. Like I want to see him in an ugly sweater in his relationship with John. I've really enjoyed the fact that Davos cannot politic worth shit. The this is Jon Snow, he's king in the north introduction, or this week, I forget exactly what he said to Missandei, but it was just absolutely with the in the conversations about marriage. But the most important thing that happened, other than Theon showing up, which is not a reunion that I thought about at all, but that was cool.
Oh, I've been waiting for that for a while, and
It just didn't cross my mind because there were so many other reunions that were going to happen. But it was definitely satisfying.
I loved that, just that, and I've watched the episode a few times now.
Mm-hmm.
When they come up and Theon sees John, he's just like, John, I didn't know you'd be here. It's just like, you're reminded of Theon's entire journey.
Yes.
How much you hate him in season 1, he's smug, and then he takes Winterfell and you hate him.
Mm-hmm.
You think, like, this guy deserves to die. And then when you see what Ramsay does to him, you can't help but feel for him. And he kind of redeems himself when he saves Sansa, but then he kind of backs up on it when he doesn't help his sister.
Mm-hmm.
And he feels more real.
Yes.
He feels more real because he's a coward. Because he faces these extraordinary predicaments, and he acts unpredictably. He's not Jon Snow, who is, not necessarily bravado, but he is like the epitome almost of like honor and courage. He's all the best parts of Ned Stark without the reputation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think that it's fair to call Theon a coward. It's, given everything he's been through, he deserves to be, he deserves some serious therapy.
Yeah, I think, you're right. Not necessarily coward, more so easily manipulated. But that's why I say I think he's the most realistic. Well, not the most, but one of the most realistic characters on the show, simply because he does react in a way that you don't know from minute to minute. Is he gonna step up, or is he gonna falter?
Step off?
Yeah.
When he jumped off the boat, I actively said, "Oh no!"
Right, and you go back to like in season 2 when he kills Sir Roderick.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, when you first watch it, right, you think this is not a character that I would root for to redeem. But then when Uncle Ronnie's got the knife to Yara's throat, you want Theon, you want him to make a run at it. And from a story standpoint, I understand why they had to have him jump off.
Yeah.
Yara's still alive. Euron Greyjoy has to win that fight. You need a survivor to go back to Daenerys. I mean, there's a lot of story elements that you need to happen, that happen. But it's a little heartbreaking when he drops that sword and you're just like, no.
Yeah. But everything I didn't know I wanted happened in the Theon Jon moment.
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, it was important to show, and you almost see it on Davos's face, Jon is not Stannis, and Jon is not Ned or Robb. You think back to when Robb had to kill Karstark, based on principle. Yeah. And here it is, Jon is acting more logically and from the heart versus like, well, this is the rule and this is what we have to follow. Right. And Davos sees it. Davos lost his fingers to Stannis Baratheon because those are the rules, and Lord Karstark lost his head to Robb Stark because those are the rules. But here, Jon is able to forgive Theon's betrayal because he knows without Theon he wouldn't have Sansa back, and I think that's an important character moment for Jon Snow. Maybe not one that we necessarily needed because I feel like we already know that about Jon Snow, but it reinforces every reason you have to like Jon Snow is reinforced in that moment, and maybe that's important for Davos because it comes after he jokes about switching sides or it reinforces why Jon Snow is just as worthy as Daenerys to follow.
And after that scene, we get I called it the scene in the Lost Cave, with Daenerys and Jon Snow, where Dany gets some evidence.
Yep, and I know online, and I know you said it's one of your, if I remember correctly from your last podcast, you said it's one of your favorite episodes. I know a lot of people online are debating, is it the best episode ever, and how it's right up there in the rankings. For me, the episode as a whole was not great. It just had great moments. This was not, to me, this doesn't compare to the Battle of the Bastards or anything. And part of it is I don't like this cave scene.
Really?
I don't. Yeah, it's the cave drawings are just very convenient. It's like, what is the exact thing that you would need to show Daenerys? It just happened to be on Dragonstone, because it's like, is there? Maybe I'm missing it. I don't remember a storied history of like the Children of the Forest spending time on Dragonstone. I thought they were in the north in the forest.
If they were using the dragon glass, the obsidian.
Right, and that's true. They would have to go there to mine it. But it just, to me, it seemed so convenient. And then to show that, and to show this is what's happened throughout history, and for Jon Snow to go like, all right, look it, we're all going to die if you don't help me. And for Daenerys to still go, you have to bend the knee. I understand Westeros is different from Essos, but it sort of goes against character type of what she showed us in Essos, where she was simply concerned with doing the right thing. Now,
yes,
yeah, she gets to Westeros and suddenly the throne is now, and I know she's thought about the throne for years or whatever, but now the throne is more important than the right thing. When Jon Snow's told you repeatedly, and I'm not saying she has to trust him, but he's told you repeatedly, he has no intention on the throne. He doesn't want the throne.
Yeah.
His only intention is to save the people and serve the people in the north and kill the White Walkers, and
that he doesn't think that he can do that if he is not. He doesn't think that the Northmen will follow another leader,
southern ruler,
a southern ruler, to this battle that is super important.
And that's, and for him to look into Daenerys' eye and go, look it, no matter what you do, I'm going to go fight these White Walkers. This is what needs to be done. Without your help, we're all going to die. But I'm going to go fight anyway. That should be, to me, that should be all the proof that she needs, that he's being straightforward,
Right.
But for her constant insistence on like, nope, you got to bend the knee, you got to bend the knee, you got to bend the knee. And it's like when they first met at Dragonstone, and she brought up like, well, your ancestors bowed to my ancestors. And then he goes, yeah, but your dad was batshit crazy.
Your dad killed my grandpa.
Right. So it's like, are we adhering to the past, or are we ignoring the past? Because you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm kind of frustrated by Daenerys, who is a character I've always liked. Since she's got to Westeros, I understand her frustrations as a character, but at the same time, it's like, Jon's not making a march on the throne. I know you want to rule all 7 kingdoms or whatever, but how about we handle things in order? How about you handle, like, this is what's happening. Handle this first, and then you can argue about bending the knee later.
Yeah. Katie said that she was very, very much like Cersei this episode, and I can't disagree with that.
No, and I think that's done on purpose because
Mm-hmm.
it's something that this show's always done a good job of, and I think even better than the book ever did. The show, much more than the book, humanizes Cersei.
Yeah.
And it's not all the time. I mean, sometimes she's just straight up like a bitch.
Yeah, but other times we have the shame walk or
right, you understand motivations. You see her kids. You see she loves her children, and that humanizes her as a mother. And you see the shame walk, and you see all this stuff. And now when Daenerys gets when the Iron Throne is in sight, when it's not literally in sight, but when she's in Westeros and armies are there, all of a sudden she starts acting more like a monarch who we didn't think she would be. She didn't act that way in Essos because Essos wasn't her goal. It was simply simply a step.
yeah.
Like this is our next step. I don't have to act that way because I don't need to rule these people forever. So the parallels between her and Cersei, who's proven herself much more formidable than her father would have ever believed her capable, it's an interesting dynamic, but it's not necessarily true to character.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and it will be interesting to see after this victory. Even though I mean the victory of the battle is even though it was pretty darn glorious to watch, she burnt all the food and didn't keep them from getting the gold.
Right, and that was, you think going in before she attacks, she's, explicitly says, well,
We need
now,
to eat.
right, I can't feed my army. Cersei took high ground, she has all the food, and then you go there, and the first thing you do with Dragon is to burn the food?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, that didn't make much sense to me.
But it was damn cool to watch.
So, are we into the battle now?
We can be into the battle now. Unless I mean, we had the Tyrion, Jon, Dany moment, but I think that we covered it without specifically talking about it.
Right. And I've had quite a bit of scotch this evening, so I might be more long-winded. I'm not trying to drag things out here or anything. But I will say, I listened to you guys' episode, like you and Alex talk about the battle, and there's a couple things that I don't necessarily agree with.
All right, and you now have your soapbox, so go for it.
So, first and foremost, and this is out of order because this is at the end of the battle, it's 100% Bronn that knocks Jaime off that horse into the inexplicable abyss that's just off the anchor. And when I watched it, there was no doubt in my mind. I just assumed it was Bronn. Like I never even thought it could be Dickon. And then the next day online, people were saying they were debating about who it was. And I just thought, well, it's obviously Bronn. Why are people debating it? And then I listened to you guys talk about it, and you guys thought it was Dickon. So I went back and watched it again after listening to the podcast, and I will say this. Dickon rides a brown horse. Whoever saves him is on a white horse. Right after the scorpion is destroyed, Bronn sees a white horse.
Yes, okay, that's a good point.
They made there's a shot where he goes, okay, boom, horse. Also, you can kind of see Dickon was wearing steel armor. Bronn was wearing brown leather.
And I did see the brown leather.
Yep. And then the third thing, Bronn is wearing fingerless gloves. And when you can see when Jaime gets grabbed, whoever's wearing it is fingerless gloves. But even aside from the horse and the gloves and the leather, thematically, like story-wise, it makes more sense that it's Bronn because, well, Dickon is there, and he's there for a little bit of comic relief, and he's there to add more of a face to the Tarly family, making Sam more important. It makes more sense for Bronn to save Jaime because now Bronn and Tyrion are on the same Jaime and Tyrion are on the same battlefield, and those are the two men that Bronn has had allegiance to, and this is kind of like him. This is the point where he has to sort of pick or choose without physically picking or choosing. Like he doesn't necessarily know that Tyrion's there, but the fact that he leaves his gold, he goes to the Scorpion, and then he risks his life to save Jaime means much more than it would mean if it is Dickon who saves Jaime. Dickon, who is a character who we only really just met this episode. I mean, he appeared before this, but this is the first time we got any actual substance to his character.
Okay, those are good enough points that I'm going to consider myself largely convinced, but I also very much like playing the devil's advocate. I
Right.
don't disagree with you on any of those points, and I think you're probably right. However, number one, getting the "war is hell" speech from for the new rookie that doesn't make it home
Yeah.
is a very tried and true war movie trope.
Yep.
That's one of the things that led me to Dickon is you get the fresh faced young innocent who doesn't make it, and the grizzled sergeant that does.
So in that case, and then you guys both said you debated whether or not Jamie would be alive. Are you assuming that the person who saved Jamie and Jamie are see? And that's another thing. I never assumed that either of them were even in danger of dying. I just assumed the next episode will start with them being prisoners. And
I think that there's a good chance that whoever saved him died. I think that the little tiny pools of water are estuaries into, I can't remember the river that flows into Blackwater Bay, but are estuaries into that river. I'm sorry?
I can't help you there. I have
Yeah.
no idea. Into the river. So, but the and I will say this too. I assume that both characters are going to live. I assume it's Bronn and Jamie. But I will say everyone kept talking about this battle, and that's why it was their favorite. And I understand the importance. It's the first time in a long time, if ever, we had two characters as important as Danny and Jamie on the same battlefield, where we get to see them face off against each other. It's the most, at least going back to the Oberyn Martell and the mountain fighting, which neither of those characters are as important, but to take two recognizable name characters and pit them against each other and know one of them's not going to come out of it. So I understand why the stakes were high there, but for me, from an emotional standpoint, the Battle of the Bastards, you have much more buildup. So there's all this buildup, and the more buildup you have, the higher the payoff is. And this season, while I enjoy the fast pace and them tying up loose ends and them like moving things along, the faster you move things, the less buildup you have, thus the less payoff. So to me, when Jamie was charging Daenerys, I did not think, at least not in this episode, we were going to see either character die. I didn't believe that they would kill either character, so I wasn't surprised when Jamie got tackled off the horse. But it was still a very good, like, edge of your seat moment. But it's just, it's not. There wasn't
you
enough.
expected that everyone was wearing plot armor,
Right? Exactly. And the one character who I thought for sure was dead, who may be dead by your reasoning, is Bronn. If it is Bronn that can't, but when Bronn was stumbling around after his horse lost its leg, and he's bumping into Lannisters on fire, and he's unarmed with no horse, I thought they're going to kill Bronn. And to me, that would have been stakes. That would have been high enough stakes to pay off the episode. But then they didn't kill him off, at least not definitively. And then Jamie doesn't die, and then Daenerys doesn't die, and then Drogon doesn't die. And I know that you and Alex had talked about, I think more so Alex saying she didn't want to see another Scorpion, and she's like, okay, it's a cool enough weapon, but I've seen enough of it. In my head, Cersei doesn't have one of those. She's probably got fucking 50 of those.
Yeah.
And I think guaranteed some of those dragons are dying this season. Because if they take King's Landing and they defeat Cersei, the White Walkers don't seem like enough of a threat when you have 3 dragons. When you know the dragons can eliminate this army, I think you have to kill 1, if not 2, and maybe even all 3 of them for the Night's King and the White Walkers to really feel like they have a chance to defeat the living. I think so long as those dragons are trump cards, and as long as you have them, they're too powerful. And I think that's what the whole point of showing Tyrion's reaction to everything, and the preview for next week when Tyrion and Varys are talking, is simply Tyrion realizes, as good a heart as Dany may have, no one should have a weapon as powerful as these dragons.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think, I'd be shocked if season 8 starts and there's more than one dragon still alive.
I agree with you that I don't know that we'll lose both, but I was pretty sure we were going to lose one this episode.
And Dragon is the only one they've spent any time, as far as you can develop a dragon, the only one they've spent any time developing is Dragon. He's the biggest, he's the most powerful, he's the one Danny rides. So when he got hit, that to me was the highest stakes of the episode. But when he simply lands and destroys the scorpion, at that point, I didn't believe that they would kill Jaime or anything like that. And but it was them burning Lannisters alive was reminiscent to me back to like Terminator 2 when Sarah Connor's having her dream sequence and you see the people exploding into dust, and that's a very powerful imagery.
Yeah. One thought I've had about Drogon is that Qyburn has worked with poison in the past.
Poison tipped
scorpion, and somehow he knows how to poison a dragon. That's just it's the sort of thing that they would pull.
Yep.
I don't know if it's the sort of thing I would like. In fact, I would say it's most likely the sort of thing I wouldn't like. But
no, it'd probably be some bullshit if they pulled that. I'd be like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
But I see it as a possibility.
7 seasons worth of, yeah. Well, when you've been hyping the dragons for 7 seasons, and I mean, full well, anybody who watched the show early on, like it was obvious where they were spending the budget. Like, okay, this week we're going to get 2 minutes of dragons. One will be loose, the other 2 will be in a covered cage.
Yep.
It just wasn't. So we've been waiting for the payoff, and now finally here, the first real battle outside of against the Sons of Harpy in the arena. First real battle where you get to see some dragon action, and they bring one of the 3, and it does get injured. So if they decide to kill off the most powerful dragon, be like, oh, well, that scorpion bolt was poisoned. I don't think...
You think people will take to the streets?
Yes. I don't think that will have a good reaction. And I'm not worried about it because I just don't think they do it. And I think Qyburn's still got some tricks up his sleeve. I don't think the scorpion is his end-all, be-all. I do think a couple of these dragons are going down, maybe just from mass number. Daenerys can't storm the Red Gate with just the Dothraki. She's going to take the dragons. That's her trump card, so she's going to use it, and it's just going to be a matter of how many of them survive and what's left over to face the White Walkers. I've thought before the season even started, I thought season 7 is going to be about Cersei and the Iron Throne and Daenerys becoming queen, and then the final season is going to be all about the Night's King.
Yep.
And next week is titled Eastwatch, so from that we can surmise that it's going to be, we're finally going to see the White Walkers and the Night's King. They're going to attack Tormund at the castle.
And it's suddenly going to become a threat to the Seven Kingdoms.
Right.
A tangible threat.
But here we are in this super sped up season 7. We're 4 episodes in, and we've just whipping through storylines and killing off characters, and we haven't seen the White Walkers at all. So now that they're going to show up, presumably in season 7, in episode 5 of season 7, I think they're going to cause some mass destruction because they have to footprint.
I agree.
And the Hardhome episode, I mean, anybody who wasn't, justifiably terrified from watching that is, this isn't going to be any nicer. This is going to be, I think they're going to just continue to show how powerful the Night King is and how unbeatable this army is. And the combination of Valyrian steel and dragonglass and actual dragons as the only ways to defeat this army. This is not a show about happy endings. Some of these dragons have to die, and you have to up the odds, and they have to make it more difficult, simply to stay with the tone that they've set for 7 years.
All right, I think that's a pretty good point to end it, because I mean we don't know what's going to happen. We've got some ideas, but I mean we'll find out more on Sunday.
Yep.
So yeah, Brian Kronner, thank you so much for coming on this week. It's grizzlybomb.com, and what's the website for Geek?
Geekexchange.com.
Geekexchange.com.
And Johnny, thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah, it was a blast.
It's been a couple years since I put the headset on, and I had a little bit more to drink than I planned. So I had a lot of fun though. Anytime you guys,
Yeah, absolutely. Next
ask
time
me back, I'll be happy.
We'd love to. I'd love to have you back, and next time Alex will be here as well.
Well, and we've been talking about relaunching the old Geek podcast, and if that happens, I'll definitely ask you to come by.
Oh,
and,
fantastic!
So yeah, I appreciate the invite, and I had a lot of fun. So
all right, cool. Thanks everybody. Tune in on Sunday night, Monday morning for our discussion of Eastwatch. Bye bye.